Russia is sharply condemning U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran, warning that the Middle East is being pushed toward what it calls an abyss of uncontrolled escalation. In a strongly worded statement, Moscow described the military action as a dangerous and irresponsible move with potentially catastrophic consequences.
On the morning of February 28th, the armed forces of the United States and Israel began conducting military airstrikes on Iranian territory. The scale and nature of the military, political, and propaganda preparations that preceded this reckless step, including the deployment of a large military force to the region. The United States leaves no doubt that this is a premeditated and unprovoked act of armed aggression against a sovereign and independent state, a member of the United Nations, in violation of the fundamental principles and norms of international law. It is also condemnable that the attacks are once again being carried out under the cover of a renewed negotiation process, supposedly aimed at ensuring the long-term normalization of the situation around the Islamic Republic. And this is contrary to the signals conveyed to the Russian side about the lack of Israeli interest in a military confrontation with the Iranians. The international community, including the leadership of the UN and the IAEA, is obliged to immediately provide an objective and uncompromising assessment of these irresponsible actions aimed at undermining peace, stability, and security in the Middle East. Washington and Tel Aviv have once again embarked on a dangerous adventure, which is rapidly bringing the region closer to a humanitarian, economic, and possibly even radiological catastrophe. The intentions of the aggressors are clear and are being declared by them quite openly: to destroy the constitutional order and eliminate the leadership of a state they dislike, a state that has refused to submit to forceful dictates and hegemony. The responsibility for the negative consequences of this man-made crisis, including an unpredictable chain reaction and the escalation of the spiral of violence, lies entirely with them. The severe consequences of these reckless actions for the global non-proliferation regime, whose cornerstone is the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, are being openly ignored. At the same time, the American-Israeli tandem hides behind a supposed concern that the Iranians might acquire nuclear weapons. Bombing nuclear facilities that are under IAEA safeguards is unacceptable. In reality, Washington and Tel Aviv have motives that have nothing to do with the non-proliferation regime. They cannot fail to understand that by plunging the Middle East into the abyss of uncontrolled escalation, they are in fact encouraging countries around the world, especially in the region, to acquire increasingly serious means to counter emerging threats. Of particular concern is the systematic nature of the destabilizing actions carried out by the U.S. administration over the past months against the international legal foundations of the world order, including non-interference in internal affairs, the rejection of the threat or use of force, and the peaceful resolution of international disputes. We demand that the situation be immediately brought back on track toward political and diplomatic settlement. Russia, as before, is ready to assist in finding peaceful solutions based on international law, mutual respect, and a balance of interests.
Russia's foreign ministry said Washington and Tel Aviv have embarked on what it calls a dangerous adventure, warning the strikes could trigger a humanitarian, economic, and even radiological crisis across the region. Officials in Moscow argued that the escalation risks encouraging countries to pursue more advanced weapons in response to growing security threats. Russian President Vladimir Putin has already convened a high-level Security Council meeting to assess the situation, signaling the seriousness with which the Kremlin is viewing the unfolding conflict. Russian President Putin's confidant Dmitry Medvedev delivered a pointed criticism of U.S. President Donald Trump, suggesting that diplomatic talks with Iran were merely a cover for military action. The United States and Israel say the strikes are aimed at neutralizing threats tied to Iran's military and nuclear ambitions, with Trump framing the operation as necessary for American security.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world. For 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted death to America and waged an unending campaign of bloodshed and mass murder, targeting the United States, our troops, and the innocent people in many, many countries. Among the regime's very first acts was to back a violent takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, holding dozens of American hostages for 444 days. In 1983, Iran's proxies carried out the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut that killed 241 American military personnel. In 2000, they knew and were probably involved with the attack on the USS Cole. Many died. Iranian forces killed and maimed hundreds of American service members in Iraq. The regime's proxies have continued to launch countless attacks against American forces stationed in the Middle East in recent years, as well as U.S. naval and commercial vessels in international shipping lanes. It's been mass terror, and we're not going to put up with it any longer. From Lebanon to Yemen and Syria to Iraq, the regime has armed, trained, and funded terrorist militias that have soaked the earth with blood and guts. And it was Iran's proxy, Hamas, that launched the monstrous October 7th attacks on Israel, slaughtering more than 1,000 innocent people, including 46 Americans, while taking 12 of our citizens hostage. It was brutal, something like the world has never seen before. Iran is the world's #1 state sponsor of terror and just recently killed tens of thousands of its own citizens on the street as they protested. It has always been the policy of the United States, in particular, my administration, that this terrorist regime can never have a nuclear weapon. I'll say it again, they can never have a nuclear weapon. That is why in Operation Midnight Hammer last June, we obliterated the regime's nuclear program at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. After that attack, we warned them never to resume their malicious pursuit of nuclear weapons, and we sought repeatedly to make a deal. We tried. They wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. Again, they wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. They didn't know what was happening. They just wanted to practice evil. But Iran refused, just as it has for decades and decades. They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore. Instead, they attempted to rebuild their nuclear program and to continue developing long-range missiles that can now threaten our very good friends and allies in Europe, our troops stationed overseas, and could soon reach the American homeland.